Hi, everyone. Today, we are very excited to be speaking with one of our behavior resource members, Kaylin Moss, who is a BCBA and play consultant and works in the field of early intervention and natural environment teaching. Hi, Kaylin. Welcome.
Hi.
So if you can start by telling us a little bit about your background and how you got into the field, specifically how you developed this passion for early intervention.
I started out actually at a school that's in my area. That's a charter school for kids with autism. And I was a teacher there. And I really liked how the behavioral therapist, like everything that she did when I was there, like anytime we had any issues, obviously she was a big resource that we had. And I started looking more into what she was doing because I'd never heard of it, honestly. I'd never heard of behavioral therapy. I'd never heard of BCBAs. Like I didn't hear any of that. I was like, what is she doing? And so, and looking into all of that, I started to go into school for it. And then she agreed to actually be my mentor that was allowing the supervision. And so I stayed under her for 2 years, strictly just doing behavioral therapy before switching over to do strictly just early intervention, which has more to do with my mom than anything because she's in early intervention and she kept pushing it and was like, everything you say when you come home from school is things that I would tell the parents to do. I think you should do this, and kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And so finally I was like, fine, I'll try it. Like, I mean, the worst thing that could happen.
Mom.
Yeah.
Whatever, Mom.
Like the worst thing could happen is, I don't like it and I just go back, to working in a school. And I fell in love with it. I was like, oh my God, this is totally what I'm meant to be. And she was like, I knew you would like it. I was like, of
course. Question is, were you old enough at that time to realize it's okay if my mom's right?
Yeah. This was back in 2016 when she pushed me hardcore to like finally break free of like the school life and go into early intervention. Mm-hmm. I'm glad she did. I'm glad she was very persistent. I mean, when I say persistent, it was like every single day for like 4 months. She was like, you should do this. You should do this. This is what you get paid. This is what you could do. Da, 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 da. And I was like, I want to be a BCBA. Leave me alone. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it out of school. And then finally I was like, fine, I'll try it.
I love that story. I had a similar experience where I was working in a preschool, and then you find out that there's this thing as like behavior fairies, and they can like fix problems, and it becomes like, well, I want to do that. And I know, like, the transition from being a teacher to being a BCBA, I felt like was so natural and was like such a good application. I'm wondering if how you feel like your experience as a teacher, your background in that helped you as a BCBA, especially being in early intervention. How did you use some of those skills in your current role?
So I will share, ironically, I was teaching at a different school before I went to the school that like showed me this beautiful behavioral world. And the school I was at there, like it was like the worst experience you could possibly have as a first time teacher. Like the principal did not like me, and it was awful. And she told me I had no clue how to do anything. Like she claimed that my kids they were not the way they should be. And my class was like the mixed up class that had like, kids that were on second grade level, but also kids that were like barely able to like know what their name was. And the ESD teacher there actually told me what I was doing is correct for these kids, but not for the school. I was like, what does that mean? And that's when I switched schools, and I had no clue what that meant until I switched schools and understood like, okay, there's like mainstream schools, and then there's like schools that I guess actually cater to the child and not to the school system. But that actually, that showed me a lot, because when I was teaching in the mainstream school and doing what I really should be doing and getting in trouble for it, I was just so unhappy. But then when I switched schools and was teaching and doing things the way I should be with the kids, it was just a totally different experience. And then like you, I got to see the behavioral therapy fairy in a sense that was helping with everything. And I was like, oh my God, I want to be her. Like she's like magic. And she just walks into the room and it's like, do this, do this, do this. And then all of a sudden the kids would just start to calm down like immediately. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know, she's got like some sort of special gift.
Wand or something, right?
Yeah. And so I definitely did that. And I was fortunate enough that when I was at the new school that I was able to watch her in a sense for a good 4 years while I was going through getting my master's and doing everything you need to get to the supervision part. And so I think being able to just observe her as a teacher really helped also, because I mean, again, she'd come in and she'd just be like, oh, let's try this, this, and this. And then we'd try it. Yeah. And all of a sudden the kids would start like calming down and everything was just better again. And we were just like, oh God.
I always say that everything happens for a reason, right? So when you started telling me about your old school, I mean, it's really frustrating and also heartbreaking, right? I mean, it's frustrating for you, and but it's probably just heartbreaking as well, because you see these kids who need help and you could have helped them, but you didn't quite have the tools back then, but you knew something could have been done, and just the whole culture, you weren't able to help. But now, moving to a new school, not only were you like, okay, I'm able to help these kids, but also you fell into the field that you're very passionate about. So, without that switch, you may not have found this magic land of behavior fairies, right?
Yeah, no, that's how I felt. Like when I switched schools and saw everything, I was like, all right, this was meant to be. I was meant to start out at the school that I hated, but the thing that made me switch to the school that I obviously fell in love with everything was I had a little boy in my class who had autism, and I had only really worked with autism babysitting wise. So it was only the fun part, because we would basically spend our day jumping on trampolines and being able to basically do whatever he wants to do, where it's very different, obviously, in school settings. And I literally was doing everything that the ESD coordinator was telling me to do with him. But it was making the principal so upset. And I was like, I don't understand why you're getting upset, because I'm letting him take his time to get to the carpet, or I'm making sure that he's last in line for lunchtime, because I know he needed, those 5 minutes to transition from sitting at the desk to standing up at lunch. And they would just get so angry at me. I was like, I just don't understand this. And then switching schools, I was like, this is how it should be. like I was doing things correctly. Didn't know what I was doing, but I was doing things correctly.
Intuitive. The other thing that's such an awesome experience is just that you had that 4 years of learning time under a BCBA, and being able to watch what that BCBA was doing as well, and being able to take that feedback and, taking it and running with it. It's so crucial. I was having this conversation with a friend of mine a few days ago, just saying in any job, not just as a BCBA, but in any job, you really do need to start at the grassroots so that you understand it. And, there are some people in our profession that go right from, their bachelor's to their master's, and then they want to come out and they want to be a BCBA and they want to be an ABA consultant. And it's really difficult to do that because they're book smart, but they're not necessarily had any experience with kids. And obviously that's what your 2,000 hours is supposed to do for you, but it doesn't always work out that way. So you were so fortunate to be able to have that time in the trenches, as I would call it, right?
No, I completely agree with that. And I think I also had an added benefit that she was because I told her, I don't want to work with the older kids. I'm pretty sure I want to work with the little ones. And she was very adamant, like, no, you need to make sure that that's what you want. And when it was my 2 years of being supervised, she was like, you're going to be with all age groups. I don't care if you think you want to be with the babies, like you need to be with the little ones all the way up to the 16-year-olds. And I was like, but I don't want to. And she pushed it and was like, no, you're doing this because if you decide later on that you want to be with the older kids and you didn't have time with them, you're going to be kicking yourself. And I was very grateful for that, because it did show me, yes, I do want to be with babies.
I mean, there's something to be said for that. I've always said I love early intervention and I love the little kids, but the little kids grow up after a while. And, way back when I was at a school and I was working with, all age groups, and same thing, I wanted to be with the little kids, and I sought out the little kids, and my mentor said, go and get that experience with all age groups. And I did. And I'm currently working in a group home right now, which is something I never thought I would be doing because I like the early ones. But like I said, they grow up, and I'm loving my time working with 20 to 30-year-olds right now. And I love it. But it was, I had the experience from way back when to be able to transfer that over. So you never know where life's going to bring you.
No, No, you don't. And that's what she kept saying. Every time I would fight her like the first like month, and I'd be like, I really don't want to be with them. They're huge. Like they're gonna like tear me up. And she'd be like, then you need to learn how not to. Like you need to like learn where to place your body.
Yeah, that's some great advice. You also mentioned that you're a play consultant trained with the Play Project. Can you tell us about that? What is the Play Project?
So it is kind of an alternative to ABA therapy. I will share that the founder of it is not very fond of ABA therapy, so it can be a little awkward for a BCBA to sit through the training. It was very awkward for me. But it has the same type of foundation as ABA if you're going to be doing natural environment. And so it's play-based, and so it's really just teaching the parents how to get on the same level as the child before you start building the child up to play in other ways, like pretend play and things like that. But the whole purpose of it is to teach the parents, instead of, sitting down with the child and trying to make them do things that they most likely aren't going to do, to sit down on the floor with them and maybe start with a little parallel play or just making silly noises, tickles, whatever the kid is really into. You're going to sit down and you're going to do what they want to do versus trying to do it adult directed. And it can be a little hard for the parents because you're basically telling them, do what your child wants to do. And if their child wants to sit there and constantly roll a ball back and forth, I mean, the parents are like, really, we have to do this for the next 15 minutes. And it's like, yeah, that's what he wants to do. We're going to do this for 15 minutes if that's what he wants. But I've seen a big change in a lot of the kids that I see, that just working on their level and bringing it up really.
I really do wish that, everybody would just work together and, get along in the playground, right? I mean, very similar. I was trained in Greenspan, right, into floor time with Stanley Greenspan and Serena Weeder, and they are not ABA, they don't like ABA either. But it's probably one of the best trainings that I ever did, similar to you, because they really taught me to get down to the kids' level and, be interested in what they're interested in, do what they do, get into their world, and then slowly close those circles of communication is how they described it. And that sounds like the Play Project.
That's actually the same language the Play Project uses.
Yeah, and it also sounds very similar to ESDM. And, there's so many acronyms in this world, and there's so many different, and there's RDI, which is Relationship Development Intervention, which is Steve Gutstein. And they all say similar things. Like, we just need to get along in the playground and say, yes, you know what? Sure, I'm a BCBA, but I need to be flexible enough to look into other areas because they may offer great tips as well. Just my responsibility is I need to figure out how to measure this so that I can see some change.
And I think play makes people uncomfortable for some reason. I'm not sure if it makes the BCBAs uncomfortable or the RBTs or paraprofessionals. And maybe that's why all these other people have kind of distanced themselves because they really want to focus on play and be uncomfortable with play and follow the child's lead. But that's such good advice as okay, so be uncomfortable for a little bit. You don't have to give instructions. We don't have to get them to follow directions, but it's really just about getting down on their level and meeting them where they're at.
That's exactly what it is. And I completely agree. It can be so hard, not even just for professionals, but for the parents. Everyone just has such a hard time just accepting okay, you're just going to sit on the floor and whatever so-and-so wants to do, that's what we're doing. And they're just well, do I ask them, do you want me to ask him questions? Am I supposed to ask him what color this is? And I'm like, no, don't ask him questions. You can comment, you can be silly, make silly sounds. If he drops the ball, make a little poop noise and make it silly, but no, you don't need to grill him and ask him a million questions.
One of the best advice I was ever given, or it wasn't even advice, but just ABA therapists ask way too many questions. And I've always held that with me. It's we need to figure out how to comment and, evoke other comments, because in conversation, I'm asking you questions right now, but conversation isn't about question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. It's comment, 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 comment. Unless you're my mother, I'm sorry, Mom. But right? What are you doing? What's going on now? What are you doing next week? Blah, blah, blah. What's going on in 4 months from now? Because I need to know. Blah, blah, blah. Right? But if you're not someone's mother, you shouldn't be asking them lots and lots of questions. Right? So I love that other disciplines are, talking about this and saying, no, it should be commenting, and it should be, a question is really a demand, and that causes a kid to shut down. And that's not what we want, especially at the beginning.
And I think a lot of people struggle with, well, I have to get them to do stuff. And like, what am I teaching them if I'm just following their lead? And something that I was working on this week with a therapist was, if you can get them to be engaged, all you need is like a little pause, or just wait for some kind of response. And that could be an eye gaze, a reach, a point, a gesture, anything. And that's the SD, right? Your pause is the SD, their type of nonverbal communication is the response, and your continuation of that game or that song is the reinforcement. And that doesn't have to be a question, an answer, and an edible, like so many of those, SDR, SRS contingencies can be play-based. Like it doesn't have to be like the DTT style. And I think people just need to be more open with what play can look like in an ABA setting.
I completely agree with that too. I think one thing that I'm starting to see is the kids that I see who have ABA, because I've had a couple of sessions where we're trying to like merge their actual ABA therapy with the play therapy. Like I've tried to tell the parents, it might help if we're all doing the same thing. And it was so hard for the RBT when I was telling her, just get on the floor and, let's just play with him. Like we don't have to ask him questions. And she literally looked at me and she was like, well, what am I supposed to say to him? And I was like, just be silly. And she was like, but what do I say to him? And I was like, just make silly sounds. Like you don't have to ask a demand. Like just make silly sounds. That's all we're doing. And she was like, I don't really like this. And I was like, okay.
It's hard.
I didn't know how to respond honestly to that. And I was like, okay.
Some people don't know how to play, right? Some people don't know how to play. And some people have been so conditioned to carry around a clipboard, with their data and, talk about this and preference assessments and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, just if you play, you'll find out what their preferences are. If you play, you'll pair yourself automatically. If you play, there's so many great things that come out of that. Data can come later.
And I try to be really intentional about that no questions, only comment. So if I'm like, even if it's a kid I'm not working with and like I'm walking by or I'm going into a classroom, I have to retrain myself. And it is an effort to not say, what are you doing? What's for lunch? What are you eating? What's happening now? But I have to like remind myself, no, just say, oh, you're eating crackers. Oh, I love crackers. Or it looks like you painted today. And it has to be a conscious effort. So I get where this therapist is coming from. Like this makes me really uncomfortable, but the more you do it and the more you're intentional about it, it really does make a big difference, because you start to notice that like kids respond, or like you're conversational with these kids, as opposed to like, what are you doing? What are you doing? What color is it? What shape is it? And like nobody likes that. So it is a good thing to be aware of.
I completely see that also. And it is hard. I tell the parents that too. I tell them you have to kind of retrain your brain, and they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, when we start playing, you're going to see it. You're going to have to retrain your brain, because we're not going to be sitting down and saying, what shape is this? What color is this? Instead, it's just going to be, if you put the shape on the puzzle, maybe you make a silly sound, or you can tell him, I like your puzzle.
Well, speaking of parents, I know a lot of people, a lot of questions we get are on this parent training topic and working with parents. And especially in early intervention, parents play such an important role. And I'm wondering if you have some advice on ways to incorporate parents, to support parents so that they can really be a part of the team.
I would say mainly just having them be part of the sessions. I think that was my biggest, the thing that I didn't like when I kept going for interviews and seeing the clinic world. The parents were never, at least the clinics I went to, I should say. I mean, I'm sure there's probably clinics that do things totally different. But the ones that I went to, and I only went to 4 before I decided maybe this isn't for me. The parents weren't allowed in the room. Like they were not allowed to be part of stuff. I didn't like that. I thought that seemed silly, because the parents should be with them more than we are. Ideally, they should be. And then when I started to do things on my own and especially with the play projects, but when I was doing it on my own and I was asking parents, when we're having our sessions, you're going to be there for the full session. It's hard for parents. It's hard for parents to accept it. They're not going to be able to like leave because they want that. And I had to like explain to them basically, this is how I do things. This is how I see the benefits happening. But if you are uncomfortable with this, then I can refer you to somebody else who will do it in a way that you're more comfortable. But I would say, at least for the early intervention, maybe the best thing is to really help parents better understand the benefit of them being part of the session, because ultimately, I mean, they're with their kids way more than we are, hopefully. Hopefully.
Yeah, we see the big success with those parents who are following through, and with those parents who know how to relate to their kids. And, as a parent, it must be really scary if you can't relate to your kid, or if you've got somebody coming over, or you drop your child off somewhere and your child's running to that person, but they won't run to you. That must be heartbreaking. So, those parents who are able to take the time to sit in with you. And again, that's difficult too, because some parents work a lot. But if they can block their calendars and sit in and make sure that, ABA is a priority and that they learn it, we've seen the best outcome with that as well.
Yeah, I think it's because it's not just about the following through. Like, I've taught your child something and now you have to follow through. I think it's about like behavior is happening 24/7. And if we're kind of retraining behavior and we're like training the environment and how they interact with the environment, the parents are a huge piece of that. So it's really important that everybody's, interacting the same way and having the same contingencies, and the same, setting up the child for success in all their environments, because we can't isolate behavior to 3 hours a week of ABA. It really happens everywhere.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that also. I know I used to tell the parent, it doesn't matter how your kid is with me. It matters how they are with you. And so if your kid is able to sit and read a book with me, that's great. Like, that's really sweet. But if they can't do it with you, then that's going to be an issue, because we want them to be able to do these things with you. It's nice if they can do it with me. Like, it's great. It makes my heart really happy. But at the same time, it matters more that they're able to do these things with you, not me. Like, I'm just here for the moment. You're there for life. They need to be able to do things with you.
I think I heard someone say recently that a sign of our success as BCBAs is what our kids can do in other environments and with other people. So we can even take them through 10 years of ABA, 15 years of ABA, and then they graduate and none of that actually generalizes. So our success is determined by their success in other environments and other people in other settings. And that's so true.
That's awesome.
What would you say to someone who is, maybe a new BCBA or someone who wants to get into early intervention? Like, any tips or, any suggestions for them?
Definitely look into coaching. I would definitely say that coaching the parents is big. And I feel like the therapists that I work with who haven't looked into coaching, because part of my main job is helping the providers learn how to work with the parents in a coaching style. And the providers who are just more comfortable doing one-on-one therapy have a really hard time switching their brain to coaching, like a really hard time. And so that would be my biggest thing, is if you're going to be doing early intervention, ABA, non-ABA, whatever kind of early intervention you're doing, to look into coaching, because the parents, and that's the biggest part of it. Like, our small little time with the kids, whatever it may be, is not going to be nearly as big of an impact as what it is with their caregivers, I should say, because it's not always just the parents. There's also grandparents and babysitters and nannies that also can be involved in the situation. But I would say that'd be the biggest thing. If you're going to be doing early intervention for ABA, it'd be a totally different answer if it's strictly just ABA. But for early intervention, ABA would be coaching. That would be my biggest.
For sure. Do you have any go-to resources that you would recommend for people getting into early intervention?
EPIC, I forgot what it stands for. Early intervention. I forgot what EPIC stands for, but they created basically the best coaching model besides the Denver model. I would also say the Denver model, obviously, to look into. But they did research in like 4 different states, and it was based off of different types of early intervention. And in the end, it was made so that providers are able to coach not just the parents, but also teachers, and whoever works with the child on how to work with the child so that it can be something that everyone is able to do. So you don't just have one person that's able to work with the child or one person that feels comfortable working with the child because they're the one who's been doing everything. But everyone involved is able to equally and adequately work with the child for success.
I just looked up EPIC. Is it Embedded Practices and Intervention for Caregivers?
Thank you.
Sounds amazing. Put that in the show notes.
Their research is what my main job uses, because we call it FLEPIC because it's Florida's version. And so they changed it slightly just because a lot of the stuff that they did was in like Iowa and Pennsylvania. And so it had like a lot of like wintry type of research and things like that. And they were like, well, not quite specific enough for Florida because
just take your child out and go tobogganing. They're like, what's that?
So they changed it slightly, but it's the same concept. Like it's the same research and everything, just ours is tweaked to better fit Florida.
Yeah, for sure. So
I love the coaching suggestion. I think that it's something I think I need to do more of. And I think I'm, going to look into this EPIC program, but I think with early intervention and pairing that coaching, it's such a great and important thing to remember as a BCBA that we're not as good as our sessions are, but we're as good as our parents and caregivers and teachers can be with our kids. So I really love that. Thank you. Thank you for being here, Kaylin, and thank you for being a member and for being a part of our community and for participating and facilitating the conversations that happen in our community. We really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing.
It was wonderful to talk to you.